Okay, for those students who aren't in Vancouver and don't have access to GIS files from VanMaps, you're going to have to do a bit of an assessment on your sites to establish what you really need to draw on your site plans. Some of you have really rural sites, and so you might be wondering what else you really need to show besides the sort of outlines of space. But everybody can include more detail on their site plans, and these are working drawings that you should be continuing to produce and work with as we go along in the semester, regardless of whether they are listed as a deliverable or not. Ultimately, having a prepared site plan is going to prove a valuable canvas for you to lay out the other design proposals as we work along the section. So I'm going to pretend that my site is outside of the boundaries of Vancouver and that I don't have access to any building outlines or contours or anything else. And I'm just going to keep working from what I have in my aerial drawing. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn off some of the layers that I have already drawn, such as this figure ground basic built up area. I do want to keep some of the buildings here, but I would like to do better with the blocks. And then I'm going to work with drawing in the houses and the planted areas and begin to show where the trees are as well. So to focus in on an area, just to give you guys an example of how I might draft this out if I was doing a better draft of this drawing, I'm going to focus in on a smaller area of my site. So for now, I'm going to draw a rectangle, and I'm just going to draw it from, let's say, here down to here. And this is going to be the area that I will focus in on drafting. And I'll show you how to generally draft this kind of an area. And then you guys will have to expand that to your own sites as it works for you. So if you do have a residential, or sorry, an agricultural area that doesn't have a lot of buildings or roads or paths, then you're going to have this pretty easy. But if you have an area that's more urbanized and has more housing or more buildings, this lesson is going to be helpful for you. So first I'm going to kind of get rid of this other line work just by hiding it while I'm drawing in the other stuff. And I'm going to create probably some new layers so that are more detailed than the ones I was using for my section. So one I will use is curbs. And I'll drag that into my line work. I'm going to give it a red color. And I have buildings. I have green, but I'm also going to add trees. And I'm going to just create a random layer for like site furnishings. And I'm also going to create a layer for planting. And planting is going to be different from green. Green will just be representing the lawn areas, but planting will represent more complex areas like hedges or front gardens or things like that. So I'm going to start on the curbs layer. And the first thing I'm going to do is draw a few guidelines that can help me create the grids of these streets and these blocks. So I'm going to start by drawing a line. I'm going to try to estimate it as close as I can to where I think the curb is. So I have my Smart Track turned on, which enables me to see where I'm drawing in orthogonal mode. And I'm going to just continue this line all the way across. Then I'm going to use a command offset. So with shortcuts, it's O for offset. And then you can put in a distance, and you could try to estimate what width the roads are. Perhaps you have that information based on other information from your site, but I'm going to instead do through point, which means I can select anywhere on the screen to offset my line, and I will just try to choose as close to the curb as I can. I'm going to continue doing this for all of the roads. Okay, now that we have those basic road grids drawn in, and you see that I made a little adjustment with this one because this road was wider over here than it is over here, we can use the trim command to get rid of the intersecting lines that we won't be needing. So to do that, you can select all of the objects in the layer, just go select objects, and use the command tr for trim. Now every one of these objects is now a trim object, and so lines in between those objects can be removed just by clicking on them. Okay, so now we have essentially these block outlines, and it looks like I just forgot one of the alleyways here, so I'm going to quickly draw that in. Okay, and once you have all of those set up, now you can use a command to get those corners rounded like they are in the actual blocks. We're going to use the command fillet. So F for fillet, and now you have to select a radius, and it's a bit of an experiment depending on what your site is like. I'm going to start with a radius of 6. That is quite common for a road in Vancouver, but let's just see if that works. So the first thing you're going to do after you select your radius is select one of the lines and then select another and see how it ends up. So this one looks like it needs to be even a little bit bigger than 6. So I'm going to press F for fillet again and put in 8. So if I take these lines again, then I get a little bit of a larger fillet here. So you'll find that you'll need to adjust the radius as you go, but with city blocks, there should be some fairly consistent radiuses. It's just that we have areas where we have smaller alleyways going into the site as well, so the radiuses are going to be a little bit different. I'm going to see if 8 works in general over this site, so I'll press enter again to get back to the command and try it here. And it's a bit hard to tell, but I think that's a little large for my site, so I'm going to go back to 6 for this one. And that looks better. So I'm going to keep using 6 until I come across a curb that looks like it needs to have otherwise. Okay, we had one corner here that said it didn't want to fill it because the lines were not planar. So I'm just going to select all of these lines and use the command set PT to make sure that they're all on the same planar level. So if we leave Z checked because we want to set all of the lines to the same Z depth, I'm going to press OK and then select a point anywhere on the rest of the points that I know is flat. So I'll just select an endpoint here. And now I can be sure that all of these lines are set to the same Z depth. So I'll try to fill it again. And I'll go back to my 6-meter radius. Okay, so another issue is that these lines aren't joined. I'm going to join those and see if I can fill it now. Now I got it. So yeah, if you run into that issue, just make sure your lines are joined all the way and that they are planar. So now I have all of these blocks and they have consistent radiuses around the edges. So what we can do now is kind of take a look and see where we also have sidewalks. So I'm going to go to the sidewalk layer and I'm going to make this one yellow. And now I'm actually going to use offset again to try to estimate if I can offset this existing line to the edge of the sidewalk. So let's see how we do here. Oh, the first thing I'm going to do is select all my curbs and use the join command, J for join. And now we have these polylines are joined as open curves. So now I can offset them while I'm on my sidewalks layer and see if I can get some of those sidewalks in. So one thing you can do is try to estimate a common width of sidewalks. It's probable that all of these sidewalks have a very common width. So if we measure over here, we see this one has a width of 1.9 approximately. This one is about 1.5. This one is also about 1.5. And this one is also about 1.5. So we can also use that information to generalize about the site and say that all sidewalks are going to have a width of 1.5. So that means we can eliminate some of our lines that aren't as precise and redraw them so that they're more exact. I'm going to offset these again with the distance of 1.5. Now there's going to be a couple places where the sidewalks don't really follow the rules. Some of these are inset from the curb, others are right along the edge of the curb. So we'll have to go along and clean these up and just make sure that we're capturing all of the accurate sidewalks on this site. So for example, over here I can see the sidewalk continues along this edge instead of running along the edge of the curb. So I'm going to use a line to split this and then rejoin it into a new sidewalk. I'm going to use a guideline from up here. And then I'll offset by 1.5. And then I will use all of these other lines as trimming objects. And then I will use extend to just extend that line to the edge of the curb. And I'll trim this. I'm going to use Fillet to close off this corner here as well. So I'm going to go back to curbs, make my radius higher, and there we go. Okay, I'm going to keep on working to see if I can get all the sidewalks in here. I'm going to use Explode to break apart these polylines because I want to get rid of the two lines that are intersecting into the alley. I will use Extend to bring those two lines close to the curb. Okay, I think that's looking pretty good. There's probably some more little details that we could try to bring in here, such as the little paths between people's houses and the road. But I'll let you guys focus on those details if you think they're important to include. I would probably include them if I was producing a full site plan. But I'm going to move on to the next set of variables that we want to consider. So first I'm going to select all of the sidewalks and join them so that they are closed curves wherever possible. Okay, now I'm going to move on to the buildings. Now this is going to be another kind of exercise in interpretation on your site. So just do the best you can with the aerial image that you have. But keep in mind that all of these buildings kind of stick to the same regular grid. So if it helps you, you might want to draw some guidelines in between the properties where you can see, for example, fences, and just use those and offset them in throughout your site where you can see there's divisions between houses. And that might help you kind of try to stick to where these boundaries are. I'm going to go in and use Polyline. The command is PL. And I'm just going to try to draw in the roof profiles as best I can based on what I can see in my aerial. So I'm going to actually turn on ortho here, and that way my lines will be constrained to straight planar directions. And if you right click on ortho, you can see what your ortho angle is currently. Mine is set to 15, which means I can only draw lines in increments of 15 degrees. And that's just going to help me keep my edges straight. So I've completed just one block, and I am making some creative interpretations here based on what I know about this neighborhood. So I know that a lot of these houses have big decks on the back, and those don't count as part of the building footprint. So I'm just trying to trace out the roof outline as best I can, and I can add in those decks under another layer, for example, site furnishings, or I can even add another sublayer called decks and give that a different color. Maybe I'll give it a brown color. And then I can go in on the decks layer and trace in the outlines of those details as well. All right, once you have established the building outlines, you can get rid of any of the guidelines that you use to help you showcase where the property lines were and just delete them. Now I'm going to focus on this particular area on site furnishings and trees. First, I'll start with trees, and I'll give that a layer of dark green. I'm going to use the circle to place the trees where I can see them on the plan. So I'm going to press C for circle, and then I'm going to start kind of in the middle of one of the trees I can see, and then I'm just going to draw the circle out to the radius approximately where the tree is. And I can use the gumball just to do some minor adjustments there. I'm going to keep using circle to define all of the trees on the site. Just a note, you might want to make a distinction between what you see as coniferous and deciduous trees from the plan. This might be a little bit hard to tell, but in this plan, I think it's pretty obvious. Some of these darker, larger shapes are the coniferous trees, and then these really bright green shapes and ones that look like very leafy are the deciduous trees. So I'm going to make a distinction between those on my site as best I can. Okay, now we can go in and do some more site details. I'm going to go onto this planting layer, and I'm going to change that to a bright green color. And maybe I'll make it a little bit of a different color from this other green. I'll make it green. Okay. And then I'm going to go in and try to outline the front and backyard areas as best I can with polylines. So essentially I'm going to draw around the paths that I see on these sites and try to define it in that way. All right, you can continue filling in site details for the entire site. This is a pretty tedious process, but this is how we establish site areas and site details when we don't have a survey. So this is definitely how I would do it if I just had to go off of an aerial. And in the next video, I'm going to show you how to export this and bring it into Illustrator and start filling with hatches and giving some of these site details some more definition with blocks.